What did Ruth do when she came to Bethlehem, and why was this allowed? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Ruth on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Ruth chapter 2, verses 1 to 7. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Ruth chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. There was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless you." And Boaz said to his servant, "Who is in charge of the reapers? Whose young woman is this?" So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, "It is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little in the house. Naomi has returned to Bethlehem from after her husband and children have died. But she hasn't come totally alone, for Ruth, her daughter-in-law, has returned with her. Ruth is not an Israelite, she is a Moabite. But since she has married into Naomi's family, Ruth has become a believer in Jehovah. So strong is her faith that she didn't blame God for the death of her husband, nor did she want to remain in Moab, who worshipped other gods. She wanted to go to Israel with Naomi, even if that meant not getting married again. So both Naomi and Ruth came back to Israel, settling in Bethlehem, the town of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband. When they arrive, Naomi is recognized, and they are glad to see her. Naomi, however, is sad, for she feels that she has returned empty because the Lord has punished her. As such, she desires to be called Mara, meaning bitter. We discussed in the last lesson why Naomi's attitude is not necessarily correct, in that we can face trials for other reasons than sin, and simply because we face trials doesn't mean that the Lord is not with us. Returning to Bethlehem, however, with no husband or children, meant that Naomi and Ruth were likely in dire straits, with Naomi only possessing the land that was her husband's. But they would have had no food, nor money with which to purchase any food. Which brings us to chapter 2. In verse 1, we meet a man by the name of Boaz. At the current time, we know nothing of this man except that he was a wealthy man and was related to Elimelech. He was not Elimelech's brother, simply a relative close in kin. What made Boaz wealthy was the fields that he possessed, meaning that he could sell the crops grown in it for quite a bit of money. We don't know how much land Elimelech had, but it could have been that he had enough land to have been wealthy too, if it had not been for the famine which caused him to go to Moab. The problem for Ruth and Naomi, though, was that they were women and probably couldn't care for the land themselves, and it was not planting season, it was harvesting season, meaning that if they could tend the land, they wouldn't make any money that year because they had not planted. Having no food, Ruth asked Naomi to allow her to go into the fields and glean heads of grain after those who would allow her to do so. Gleaning is where you gather the leftovers of the harvest that was not initially harvested. Now you might ask, why would Ruth have to ask permission to do this, seeing as how they had no food? Perhaps it was a pride thing, for doing this meant that one was poor. Or perhaps it was because Naomi still owned land and could have sold it for money, thus meaning that she might not be considered actually poor, and thus should have left food for those who were actually poor. We don't know for sure, but Naomi gave permission for Ruth to go and glean in the fields, and so Ruth did just that. In the process of doing that, she came to the field of Boaz and began gleaning the grain that had been left behind by the reapers. Now is the time to ask ourselves, why was Ruth allowed to do this? After all, this wasn't her field, it was somebody else's. Today we would consider what Ruth did theft. But back in Leviticus 19, verses 9 to 10, we read, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyards, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God." In many societies today, we take for granted that there will be a social safety net provided by our governments to help those citizens that are poor. And perhaps we have abused this system in order not to be charitable ourselves, although this is certainly not true in all cases. But in Ruth's day, no centralized social safety net existed. God, however, did make provisions for the poor. Those who had fields to reap in were not to wholly reap the corners of their field, nor gather the gleanings, the leftovers of the harvest. That was for the poor. And thus Boaz's reapers allowed Ruth to do what she did, for they followed the law of Moses in this case. That a woman was gleaning in his field caught the eye of Boaz, though, and so he inquired about Ruth. The servant in charge of the reapers told Boaz of the situation and told him that she had been gleaning all morning until then, although she did need to take a rest for a little in the house. How would Boaz react to this? We'll find out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Ruth chapter 2, verses 8 to 13, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.